I never liked driving at night, especially after midnight. The world felt wrong. Streets too quiet, shadows too long. But last Friday I had no choice. Work ran late, and I had to drive 3 hours on back roads to make it to my sister's place for her engagement party the next morning. The first hour wasn't so bad. My car's headlights carved through the darkness, and my playlist kept me company. But then, as the 2-lane road wound deeper into the forest, my reception died. The music cut out. The only sounds left were my tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of the trees swaying in the wind. That's when I saw it. The figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, the shape solidified into a man. He stood perfectly still, staring at my car as it approached. He wore a tattered coat, his face pale and expressionless. His eyes, though, they glinted unnaturally in the beam of my headlights. I slowed down instinctively, but something deep in my gut screamed, "Don't stop." When I passed him, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror. Big mistake. He wasn't on the shoulder anymore. He was standing dead center in the road, staring after me. And I swear, even though my car was moving, his face stayed perfectly visible in the mirror, like he was still standing right behind me. I slammed my foot on the gas, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. The car roared forward, and I gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. My mind raced just as fast as the car. What the hell was that? Who stands in the middle of nowhere at night, staring like that? The forest pressed in tighter as the road narrowed. My high beams seemed to fight against the darkness, barely piercing it. Every shadow along the roadside looked like it might spring to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The road behind me was empty. No man, no glowing eyes, just black asphalt stretching into the void. Good, he's gone. Then the radio flickered on. Static, loud, grating, white noise blasted through the speakers. I jumped, nearly swerving off the road as I fumbled for the knob to turn it off. But the volume knob didn't work. The static persisted, growing louder, deeper, almost rhythmic, like whispers buried in the noise. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. That's when the headlights blinked out. The car plunged into darkness so thick, it felt like drowning. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt, my breath caught in my throat. My hands fumbled to turn the lights back on, but the switch wouldn't budge. Panic rising, I grabbed my phone for its flashlight. It was dead. I could have sworn I charged it before leaving. The clock on the dashboard was frozen at 3:33. I sat there, paralyzed, staring into the abyss ahead. That's when I saw it. A pale figure stepping out of the trees, directly into the path of my stalled car. It was him, the man from before. Only now he wasn't alone. There were more of them. At least a dozen figures emerged from the shadows of the trees, each moving slowly, unnaturally. Their heads tilted in strange angles, limbs jerking as if they weren't used to walking. The first man, the one I'd seen earlier, stood in the center, closer than he had any right to be. I hadn't heard his steps, hadn't seen him approach. They surrounded the car, their pale faces flickering in and out of view like static on an old TV. Their eyes, those same glinting, unnatural eyes, bore into me from every side. I locked the doors, heart hammering so loudly I could hear it echo in the suffocating silence. My hands shook as I tried to start the car. The engine groaned, but wouldn't turn over. I twisted the key harder, praying, pleading, swearing at it to come to life. The first man raised his hand. The others stopped moving. I froze too, staring as his arm extended toward me, his long, bony finger pointing directly at the windshield. My breath fogged up the glass as I gasped, too terrified to even think of what to do. Then he dragged his finger downward. Long, slow, deliberate. The sound was unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard magnified tenfold. It sliced through the silence, and as he drew, an intricate pattern appeared on the glass. It wasn't frost. It wasn't fog. It was something else, glowing faintly in the dark. Symbols, shapes, lines. It looked ancient, wrong, like it shouldn't exist. The other figures began to move again, this time in unison. They pressed their hands to the car windows, their faces close enough for me to see every unnatural detail. Skin too smooth, mouths just slightly too wide. I could hear them now, whispering, their voices overlapping in a low, droning hum. I tried the engine one last time. It roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The car shot forward, plowing through the circle of figures. The first man didn't even flinch as I passed. His hand still raised, his finger still pointing at me. In the rearview mirror, I saw them scatter like smoke, vanishing into the night. But the symbols on the windshield didn't fade. And neither did the whispers. I didn't slow down. Not for the twisting turns. Not for the narrow shoulders hugging the road. Not for the growing sense that I was barreling headlong into something far worse than what I'd left behind. The whispers followed me. A relentless murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the hum of my engine. They weren't coming from outside the car anymore. They were inside, circling me, invading every corner of the cab. The glowing symbols on the windshield began to shift. At first, it was subtle, a ripple, like heat waves off pavement. Then the lines twisted and coiled, rearranging themselves into new patterns, new shapes, faster and faster. It was as if the glass itself was alive, writhing in front of me. I couldn't focus on the road. The symbols were pulling my gaze, dragging my mind into their endless loops and spirals. They weren't just on the windshield anymore. They were seeping into the rearview mirror, the side windows, even the dashboard. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone in the car. The rearview mirror should have reflected the empty back seat. Instead, it showed a face. His face. The man was sitting directly behind me, his pale features warped by the shifting symbols. His eyes met mine through the mirror, and his lips parted in a slow, jagged smile. He leaned forward, closer, until I could feel the cold presence of him at my neck. "Stop," he whispered, his voice crawling into my ears like insects. I screamed and swerved, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The car skidded off the road, bouncing over uneven ground before slamming to a stop. My head snapped forward, smacking against the steering wheel. For a moment, everything blurred. When I opened my eyes, the world was still. The engine was dead again. The symbols had stopped moving but remained etched into every surface like scars. The whispers were gone. So was the man. The forest around me was silent. I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to get out of the car, to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. But as soon as I stepped into the cold night air, I realized my mistake. The figures were waiting. They stood in a loose circle around the car, their heads cocked at odd angles, their eyes shimmering faintly in the moonlight. I didn't know how they'd gotten there, how they'd moved so silently. The first man stood in front of the hood, his hands still raised, his fingers still pointing. This time he spoke aloud. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and resonant, echoing in the stillness. "Not until you see." "See what?" I croaked, my voice trembling. I didn't want an answer. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. His smile widened, impossibly, unnaturally. "Look up." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my eyes on him, on the figures, on anything but the sky. But my head tilted upward anyway, as if pulled by some unseen force. The stars were gone. In their place was an immense, swirling void, alive with the same shifting patterns as the symbols on my windshield. It stretched endlessly, devouring the heavens, spiraling downward as if it was reaching for me. And at its center, something moved, something massive. The void above wasn't just a swirling mass. It was alive. Its shifting, fractal patterns writhed with a sentience that made my chest tighten and my mind scream for an escape. The thing at its center pulsed, growing larger with each beat, its presence pushing against the boundaries of my sanity. It wasn't just enormous. It was wrong, like looking at a shape that shouldn't exist, its angles bending in ways that made no sense, as if it existed in dimensions beyond comprehension. Every inch of its surface was a roiling mass of glowing symbols, the same ones etched into my windshield. The figures surrounding me began to move. Slowly, methodically, they formed a tighter circle, their heads tilting back to stare at the thing in the sky. Their mouths opened wide in unison, but no sound came out. The first man stepped forward, stopping just inches away from me. His gaze burned into mine, his lips curling into that impossibly wide smile again. "It sees you now," he said. "You've been marked." "Marked for what?" I stammered, my voice cracking under the weight of sheer terror. "For the truth," he whispered. Then he raised his hand again, this time pointing directly at my chest. "It's already begun." I looked down. My own body was glowing. The same symbols from the void were appearing on my skin, spiraling up my arms and across my chest. They burned, not with heat, but with a cold so intense it felt like my blood was freezing in my veins. I tried to rub them away, but the more I touched them, the brighter they glowed. "Stop it!" I screamed, stumbling backward, but the figures closed in, their movements eerily synchronized. The whispers returned, louder this time, deafening. They weren't coming from the figures anymore. They were inside my head, overlapping, drowning out every rational thought. "See, accept, become." The man reached out, his hand hovering just above my forehead. I tried to move, to scream, but my body refused to obey. His touch was ice, colder than death, and the moment his fingers brushed my skin, the void surged downward, engulfing everything in its path. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, I was drowning in that swirling abyss, and the next, I was lying on the side of the road, gasping for air. The forest was gone. The figures were gone. My car was gone. I was alone. The symbols were still on my skin, faint now, but unmistakable. My phone buzzed in my pocket, miraculously alive again. The screen showed it was nearly 6 a.m., but there were no missed calls, no texts, nothing to suggest anyone had been looking for me. I hitched a ride into the nearest town, still shaking, and checked into a motel, desperate for rest. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was the void, and the thing at its center. It's been 3 days since that night. The symbols haven't faded. They move sometimes, slithering just beneath the surface of my skin, like they're alive. I haven't told anyone. I don't know how to explain it, but I know one thing for sure. That thing in the void, it's still watching me, and I'm starting to feel like it's waiting for something. I thought the nightmare ended when I woke up on the roadside. I was wrong. For 3 days, I tried to go back to normal, but normal doesn't exist when you're haunted by a cosmic void. The symbols on my skin were the worst part. They didn't hurt anymore, but they didn't fade either. At night, they pulsed faintly, casting eerie patterns across the motel walls. I stopped trying to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that swirling abyss, its patterns pulling me deeper. But the fourth night was different. I'd barricaded myself in the motel room, locking the door, drawing the curtains, unplugging the TV, anything to block out the world. The whispers had started again, faint but persistent, threading through my thoughts like static on an old radio. I was staring at the ceiling when the symbols on my arms started to glow brighter. For the first time, they burned again, cold as ice, but with a new intensity that made my breath catch. Then I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the motel door. I froze. No one knew I was here. I hadn't used my real name when I checked in, and I'd paid in cash. My phone was turned off, lying in a drawer across the room. Another knock, louder this time. I crept to the door, heart hammering. "Who is it?" My voice trembled, barely audible. Silence. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. I waited, breath held, until I was sure whoever or whatever was out there had gone. Slowly, I backed away, turning toward the bathroom to splash water on my face. And that's when I saw it. A handprint on the window. It wasn't like a normal print. It glowed faintly, the same eerie light as the symbols on my skin. The fingers were impossibly long, their shapes twisting slightly, as if they couldn't decide what they wanted to be. I stared, paralyzed, as the print began to fade, melting into the glass like it had never been there. I grabbed my car keys. Screw the risk. Screw the void. I needed to leave. I didn't make it far. The road out of town was shrouded in fog, so thick my headlights barely penetrated it. The further I drove, the heavier the mist became, until I couldn't tell where the road ended and the world began. My phone's GPS refused to load, leaving me with nothing but instinct to guide me. And then the whispers came back. Not in my head this time, but outside the car. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. Murmurs, low and rhythmic, moving alongside me, keeping pace with the car. I rolled up the windows, turned the radio off, but it didn't help. The sound was everywhere. The fog began to shift. Shapes moved within it, shadows that darted too quickly for my eyes to follow. I tightened my grip on the wheel, sweat dripping down my temples. Just keep driving. Just keep driving. A figure stepped into the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt mere feet from where they stood. My heart nearly stopped when I realized who it was. The first man. The one I'd seen on the side of the road. The one who'd marked me. He raised his hand, just like before, his finger pointing directly at me. This time, though, he smiled. A wide, chilling grin that stretched far beyond what should have been humanly possible. Behind him, the fog parted, and I saw the void again. The void stretched out behind him, consuming the road, the trees, the fog, everything. Its swirling mass was infinite, alive with those impossible fractal patterns that burrowed into my brain like hooks. I couldn't look away, no matter how much I wanted to. The man's grin widened as he stepped closer to the car. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming on the pedal. The tires screeched, but I wasn't moving. The car shuddered, groaned, and then stopped dead, as if the road had disappeared beneath it. The man tapped the hood with one long finger, and suddenly, the engine died. "No," I whispered, panic surging. I twisted the key, but nothing happened. Not even the dashboard lights flickered. He tapped again, this time on the windshield, his bony finger tracing one of the symbols etched in the glass. It flared brighter, the light filling the cab and illuminating every corner with its cold, otherworldly glow. "Get out," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "No, stay away. Get out." This time, his voice wasn't alone. It carried the weight of 1,000 whispers, overlapping, twisting, growing louder with each passing second. The symbols on my skin burned, their cold fire spreading like frostbite through my veins. The void pulsed, and the car began to shake. The metal groaned under the pressure, windows rattling as cracks spidered across the glass. I didn't have a choice. I opened the door. The air outside was heavy, oppressive, filled with a hum that vibrated in my chest. The man watched me as I stepped out, his unblinking eyes tracking my every move. Behind him, the void pulsed again, its fractal patterns growing more erratic, more alive. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this to me?" "You are marked," he said, his tone cold and final. "Chosen to see." "See what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the void. The road ahead twisted, bending upward into the swirling mass like it was being devoured. The ground beneath my feet shifted, the asphalt cracking, breaking apart. And then, from within the void, something emerged. It wasn't a shape. It was an absence of shape, a presence that defied all logic. Shadows peeled away from its form like smoke, its edges constantly shifting. Eyes, countless, glowing eyes, opened across its surface, all of them fixing on me. The whispers turned to screams, a deafening cacophony that drowned out my thoughts. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground, clutching my head. "You are its anchor," the man said, stepping closer. "It will consume. It will become." "Anchor," I gasped, the word barely audible over the screaming. "I don't understand." "You will." The thing from the void moved, stretching toward me. This presence was overwhelming, suffocating, like gravity made manifest. My body refused to move, pinned to the ground by its sheer weight. The symbols on my skin flared brighter, responding to its approach, and I felt something inside me change. The whispers weren't just in my head anymore. They were mine. For a brief moment, I understood. I saw everything: the void, the symbols, the man, the endless threads of reality bending and breaking around me. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't supernatural. It was something else. Something beyond human comprehension. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in feelings, images, raw concepts forced into my mind. It offered me a choice. Accept it. Become part of it. Let it in. Or resist and let it take the world instead. I didn't have time to process the choice. It wasn't a decision, it was a demand. The void surged, and its meaning slammed into me like a tidal wave. If I accepted, it would stop here, contain itself within me. But if I resisted, if I tried to fight, it would spread, pulling the rest of the world into its endless maw. The eyes across its shifting form stared, unblinking, waiting. My skin burned, the symbols writhing as if alive, carving deeper into me with every passing second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The man stepped closer, his voice cutting through the chaos. You are the anchor, the gate. You must decide. How? I croaked, the word barely escaping my lips. How do I stop this? You don't, he said. You let it take you. His words hit like a blow. And if I don't? He tilted his head, that awful grin spreading across his face. Then it will take everything. The thing in the void pulsed again, its massive form stretching closer, its presence warping the air around it. My vision blurred, and the whispers screamed louder, threatening to shatter what was left of my sanity. But in the chaos, a memory surfaced. A single moment from years ago. My sister, laughing as we sat on the porch, sharing stories late into the night. Her engagement party, her future. I couldn't let this thing take her, take anyone. So I made my choice. I accept, I said, the words barely audible over the roar of the void. The man's grin widened, and the thing in the void surged forward, enveloping me. It wasn't like being consumed. It was like being unmade, every part of me torn apart and reshaped, my mind stretched beyond its limits. The symbols on my skin flared brighter than ever, burning with an intensity that made me feel like I was being hollowed out, my very essence replaced with something alien. I screamed, but no sound came out. The void wasn't just around me. It was inside me now, filling every cell, every thought, every memory. I felt it writhe, shifting, testing the boundaries of my existence. And then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. I opened my eyes. I was back on the roadside, kneeling on cracked asphalt. The forest was still, silent. My car sat a few feet away, its headlights illuminating the empty road. The void was gone. So was the man. But the symbols remained. They no longer glowed, but I could feel them beneath my skin, faint and pulsing, like a second heartbeat. The whispers were gone, replaced by a new sensation. An awareness, vast and endless, stretching far beyond anything I could comprehend. I stood, shaky, and climbed back into the car. The engine started on the first try and I drove. No destination, just away. It's been a week since that night. The symbols haven't faded, and neither has the awareness. I don't dream anymore. When I close my eyes, I see the void, its shifting patterns etched into the darkness. I've started hearing the whispers again, faint and distant, growing louder each day. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I see them, eyes, not mine, but the ones from the void, staring back at me. I don't know how long I have. I don't know what I've become, but I know one thing for sure. This isn't over. It's hard to explain what it's like living with this thing inside me. The void didn't just change me physically. It rewired everything I thought I knew about reality. Every moment feels like I'm standing on the edge of an abyss, teetering between existence and something darker. The whispers aren't just noise anymore, they're instructions. They don't speak in words, but in impulses, feelings that compel me to act. Most of the time, I can ignore them, but some nights, like tonight, they grow stronger, demanding my attention. That's why I'm here, parked on the shoulder of another dark, empty road. The car is off, the headlights extinguished. The night is eerily silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. The whispers are louder now, threading through my thoughts like a song stuck on repeat. I grip the wheel, my knuckles white, and stare out into the darkness. What do you want? I ask aloud, though I know there won't be an answer. But this time there is. A shape steps out of the shadows ahead, barely visible in the faint moonlight. It's him, the man from the void. His pale face, his unsettling smile. It's all the same, as if he hasn't aged a day since that night. "You've done well," he says, his voice as cold and hollow as the void itself. "What are you talking about?" I demand, stepping out of the car. My voice is steadier than I expect, but my hands are trembling. "What do you want from me?" "It's not about what we want," he says, tilting his head. "It's about what you are." I take a step back, instinct screaming at me to get in the car and leave, but I can't. My feet feel rooted to the ground. The symbols on my skin begin to pulse again, faint but growing stronger. "You're the anchor," he continues, "the bridge, and the gate must open." "No," I say, shaking my head. "I did what you wanted. I stopped it. You delayed it," he interrupts, his smile widening. "But the void is eternal, cannot be stopped, only fed." The air grows colder, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. The road behind him begins to warp, the asphalt cracking as shadows bleed out from its edges. The void is returning, stretching its tendrils into the world. I feel it inside me, too, a pull, deep and irresistible. The symbols on my skin are glowing brighter now, their cold light illuminating the darkness. "Why me?" I whisper, my voice barely audible. "You were chosen," he says simply. The void doesn't pick at random. The cracks in the road widen, and I can see it now, spiraling, writhing, growing. The same impossible patterns that haunt my dreams. The void is hungry, and I know what it wants. I should run. I should fight. But the truth is, I've felt it all along. The void isn't just a part of me. It is me. Its whispers aren't commands. They're my own thoughts, fractured and multiplied, spread across endless dimensions. The man steps closer, his grin impossibly wide. "You know what you must do." I close my eyes, the symbols burning so brightly now that I can feel their light on my face. The void surges inside me, consuming every doubt, every fear, every trace of who I used to be. When I open my eyes, the man is gone, and the void isn't just in the road anymore. It's everywhere. The void spread, swallowing the world around me. The forest dissolved into darkness. The road cracked and twisted into nothingness, and the sky became a swirling abyss. I stood at the center of it all, the only anchor in a sea of chaos. The symbols on my skin pulsed in rhythm with the void, each beat pulling me deeper, fusing me with its infinite expanse. But I wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, the same ones I'd seen on the road that first night. They moved unnaturally, their bodies jerking like puppets on invisible strings, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The first man stood among them, his smile sharper, wider than ever before. He raised his hand, pointing directly at me. "It's time," he said. "The gate is open. The void is yours." I didn't know what he meant, not fully, but I could feel it, the power coursing through me, raw and incomprehensible, a force that could unravel reality with a single thought. The void wasn't just consuming the world. It was waiting for me to claim it. The figures knelt, their heads bowed, their movements synchronized as if they were all part of the same entity. The void pulsed in response, its swirling patterns growing more chaotic, more alive. It wanted me to act, to make a choice. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why any of this?" The man tilted his head, his expression almost amused. Because you can see. You always could. The rest of them, he gestured to the kneeling figures. They're blind. But you were born for this. The void shifted, its tendrils reaching out, wrapping around my arms, my legs, pulling me closer to its center. The symbols on my skin burned brighter, their glow blinding, their patterns shifting faster than I could comprehend. And in that moment, I understood. The void wasn't evil. It wasn't a monster. It was creation and destruction, possibility and oblivion, a force beyond morality or reason. It existed because it had to, because something had to fill the spaces between what is and what isn't. And now I was part of it. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the abyss. Time didn't exist in the void. The man and the figures faded into the darkness, leaving me alone with the weight of eternity. The whispers became a song, a harmony of infinite voices that spoke not in words, but in truths. I could have stayed there forever, but I didn't. I don't know how I found my way back, but I did. One moment I was standing in the void. The next, I was on the side of the road, the forest around me quiet and still, as if nothing had happened. The symbols were gone. My skin was bare, unmarked, and yet I could still feel them beneath the surface, humming faintly, a reminder of what I'd seen. The void didn't consume the world that night. It let me go, but not without a cost. It's been months now, and I've tried to move on, to pretend that night was just a nightmare. But the truth is, I can't escape it. The void is still with me, watching, waiting. Sometimes, when the world is quiet, I hear the whispers again, faint and distant, calling me back. I don't know how much time I have before it pulls me in for good. But until then, I'll keep driving, keep moving, trying to outrun the inevitable. Because deep down, I know the truth. The void isn't done with me yet.